Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming here. I am going to give a presentation on using DNS as a security tool. I know we love to blame it for all of our problems, but sometimes it can actually fix some of them. So just to give you a little introduction of who I am. Yes, that's me. The astute in the crowd will notice that's a Commodore 64. It's about 1985. So I've been doing computer stuff for a pretty long time. Family got a first home computer in like '89. It was a wonderful Packard Bell. I'm sure you remember some of that. And I got a hand-me-down about 2 years later from my grandfather. He's the one who got me started in this. My first security incident was in 1999. We busted a credit card security fraud ring, and that was on an e-commerce site. And that was some good times. It was a lot of fun. My boss at the time, he really enjoyed finding those people, and he would ask them what they would want on their pizza and then send a pizza to their house because he really liked to jerk their chain a little bit. It was fun. I've had a long history in technical support. I've worked at PGP and RSA, spent time at Micro Focus, which I'm guessing probably a quarter of this room has at some point. It's kind of a rite of passage in this state. Right now, I'm a senior InfoSec engineer at Dental Intelligence. They're a SaaS software company based out of Pleasant Grove. I wear a lot of hats there, mostly doing vulnerability management and security architecture right now. So I'll tell you what this talk isn't, just to get that out of the way. I'm not going to do real deep dive on technical details, and there's a reason for that. One, it'll be super dry and boring. And two, there's probably like two of you who would actually write down all the notes to do that. You're going to go Google this anyway. So I want you to understand the concepts and that some of this stuff exists so that you'll go back to day job and say, all right, I remember that thing that guy talked about. I'm going to go search for it and go and do it. This is also so that you'll always have the most up-to-date information on how to do it because stuff changes real fast. So I just want to make sure that your expectations are set here, what we're doing here. So there are a lot of different kinds of DNS records out there. There's actually no less than 48 different types of them. Odds are quite good you're not going to use more than about a handful of them, so you don't need to be staring down Cthulhu and rolling your sanity. The most important root one there is the SOA, or Start of Authority record. That's kind of your root record. It says, hey, this is where my DNS servers are located. This is telling me, all the information to stage it. And DNS is organized in what they call zones. So if you think about example.com is a zone, but com is also a zone. It happens to be a root zone. This is really important to establish the authority. You can establish what DNS servers are responsible for each zone. There's a lot of other stuff going on there, but that's the important security part. You're saying these are the servers that will actually have information you need. You'll also have NS or name server records that reiterate the primary DNS server that are responsible for any secondary servers. This is important because you can use this to control who's allowed to get a copy of all your DNS records. That is an important security function there. So these are kind of your core of DNS security, is making sure you have a good start of authority, you have good name server records. You want to make sure you're clamping down of who can do a zone transfer, who can say, hey, give me all your records, because you don't want to necessarily disclose those. DNSSEC can sometimes help there. We'll cover that a little later. The main records you're probably going to be using on a day-to-day basis are A and C name records. The A, pretty straightforward. Here's the name and here's the IP address it goes to. And if you're fancy and you're using IPv6, you might have some quad A records in there that are telling you where the IPv6 address is for this. Important to note, C names is that they are great aliases, allow you to say, hey, when you want to talk to this fully qualified domain name, you should actually go talk to that one over there. They're used a whole lot. So for example, you could have www.example.com pointing to webserver1.example.com, or it could be even more complicated, like having userportal.example.com pointing to a domain on Azure. And text-based records are ones that you're going to use a lot for security purposes. These are pretty free form. People will define, if I see something with this format, then I know how I'm going to parse it. There's a lot of RFCs out there. And the text records have proven to be a quick way to scaffold up a solution without having to necessarily go create yet another DNS record. And Since we've already got 48 of them, I imagine we're not super eager to have more. So one of the foundational failures of email is that it never bothered to validate who's actually sending a message out. And that wasn't a big deal back in the days of the ARPANET, where everybody knew every single node on the system, and spam wasn't an issue. Quickly came crashing down to earth. Your spam folder will certainly attest to that being a problem. So there were early anti-spam efforts like Spamhaus that said, well, we'll just find the bad servers and we'll just start blocking them. Has anyone gotten on a Spamhaus block list before? You know exactly how painful that is. You can't get off of it to save your life. And so it was a great idea, but a lot of people end up getting caught in the crossfire. A lot of legitimate email just gets thrown in the bin. And it was mainly because there really wasn't any good system back when they started doing it in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Now, of course, one of the problems with the internet is you can never introduce any sort of breaking change. You know when IPv6 was proposed, right? Like over 2 decades ago. Is anyone here using IPv6 on a regular basis? No, we're not, because it changes so much stuff. And so we had to figure out a way to stop spam without going and changing everything in SMTP. So of course, naturally, we're going to start using DNS to do this. So SPF was the first thing that came to the rescue. And the idea is, hey, let's have a formatted DNS text record that says, here is who is allowed to send email on behalf of this domain. The record kind of looks cryptic when you first look at it, but it's fairly straightforward structure. The text record says V equals SPF1, saying this is version SPF1. There is no version 2. They just wanted to be forward-thinking in case they had to make one, and they have not done so yet. So it's fairly simple to break down what's happening here. You will have plus to say, this is who's allowed to send. You will have negative to say, here's who's explicitly disallowed to send. You'll notice there's a record up there with a tilde in front of it, and that's to say, I want you to soft fail this. And in this record, we have soft fail anything I haven't mentioned yet. Now, you may ask yourself, why would I want to soft fail instead of hard fail anything that's not my mail server? Well, the problem is remailer services. You will find sometimes that you will go and fill out a support form, and it says, oh, well, I'm going to send email that looks like it's coming from you, and then it goes to your junk folder, and you don't ever get it. It's a horrible practice. I hate that people do it, but soft fail is kind of a good safety step there to make sure that you aren't throwing all sorts of stuff in your junk folder that you don't necessarily want to have there. So this record is saying, we say plus MX. Like, you see an MX record that's saying this is a mail server for this domain. Yeah, obviously, I want to send mail from that. Plus A. If you see an A record for this domain, yes, obviously, any A record should probably be allowed to send mail on behalf of this. And then we have explicitly an IPv4 address that's allowed to send. So the way it parses is you'll put your allows and your disallows, and then at the end, you'll have the all record, and you'll probably always have a soft fail or fail. If you don't have an allow for all, then you've lost the plot. You are not knowing what you're doing with SPF records. Please don't do that. It will be a problem. If you're looking for a good reference on SPF record creation, DMarkian is a service out there that has really good references. They also happen to offer a nice free tier to be able to see issues with your SPF and DMARC and DKIM records. Now, SPF solves one problem, which is we know which mail servers are supposed to send mail. What it doesn't solve is the problem of, is anyone messing with the message when it goes out? If you know anything about how email works, it's not a straight, my mail server talks to the recipient mail server and we're done. It bounces around through other mail servers. Now, of course, the problem there is email is all plain text. And now you could be using PGP to encrypt the contents, but the headers could still be messed with, right? And so that creates a fundamental problem of we want to ensure message integrity. And so we have DKIM that's thrown in the mix here. And in this case, we're using the mail server to cryptographically sign, yes, I am the mail server that actually sent this message, so no one can tamper with it, tamper with the headers in process. So that one is pretty important. In conjunction with that, you want to have a DMARC policy. A DMARC policy is saying, if for some reason there's a message that fails DKIM or fails SPF, tell this email address about it. Tell it what's going on. These have become requirements. Google recently announced that if you do not have SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records and you're sending more than 5,000 messages a month, they're going to throw you right in the trash bin. So it's very important to have this set up. Now, one thing to note about the DMARC reports is that they're XML files. Does anyone here actually read XML files by hand? No, we do not. We want to send them to a machine-readable format. There are services out there. I mentioned DMARCian before. They have a free tier for up to 2 domains. You can send them there. It's great to do on a personal domain, just to see, hey, here's what's happening. I actually found there were people who were trying to send junk messages on some of my domains. They learned very quickly that's not going to fly. So these screenshots kind of give you an idea of some of the reporting that it does. You can see the DMARC record on the top. Again, V equals DMARC1. There's only one version, but they still wanted to make sure. And so in this case, we're saying a policy, in this case, the reject policy, and where we're going to send those reports. So let's be honest here. When you're surfing around internal resources on your corporate network, how many times are you seeing this not secure warning because you have self-signed certificates everywhere? Every single one of you should be cringing at that. And I get it because the process of issuing, installing, and maintaining a fleet of certs kind of sucks. It's something that is not a lot of fun. DNS, though, does play an integral part in making sure that you can get this done. The first thing being that you need to have a valid domain name that's pointing to the resource, because the certificate is issued against the domain name. You can issue against an IP as a subject alternative name, but you can't issue it as a subject. That doesn't fly. And I'm sure most of you have heard of Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt can use DNS for verification. It has 2 main verification types. HTTP, where it reaches out over HTTP and says, hey, could you validate you control the system? And the other one is using DNS. With DNS, it creates a temporary text record. It validates that you have, in fact, control of the DNS records for that domain and sends you upon your merry way. And so DNS is extremely important to make sure that that works properly. A great thing is that you can use Let's Encrypt to issue certs on your internal network using DNS challenges, and nothing has to be able to reach into your network to do it. It's fantastic. So I highly recommend thinking about doing something like that. That'll help, because the fewer of these warnings you have on your local network, the more these warnings will stand out as, hey, something's not right here. Now, does anyone here remember that Symantec had a business doing certificates? Emphasis is on the word had. So they had issued over 30,000 certificates to people who did not own the respective domains, and that's why it is past tense. If you're a certificate authority, that's pretty much a death knell right there. Pretty much all of the browser vendors said, okay, Symantec, we are not going to trust you in our browsers anymore. You're dead to us. Everyone's going to distrust you. So they ended up selling the business. It was a huge fiasco for them. So DNS can solve some of this misissuance problem. There's a special type of record called a CAA record. And this allows you to list which certificate issuers are allowed for any given domain. So this is really handy. So if you're using DigiCert and you know that every single certificate you're issuing is coming from DigiCert, you can create a CAA record for that. And if someone tries to issue on Let's Encrypt, it goes, whoa, no, we're not doing that. It also gives you a nice security control so that a browser can check a CAA record and say, hold on a minute, this example.com shouldn't be using Let's Encrypt. We're going to throw that right out. It also allows you to, hit the wrong button there. It allows you to specify that you allow certain issuers to issue wildcards and certain issuers to not. So you can really cramp down on whether or not you want on who you want to be able to allow to issue certificates. And you can tell it borrows a lot of concepts from SPF and DKIM to be able to say, yes, this is who's allowed and this is who not. Now, obviously, you can see a problem here that if you are using Let's Encrypt and you make that your CAA record, well, now any Yahoo using Let's Encrypt can do that. So that's not a really good solution if you're using one of those free services, but if you're using a a different CA that can help you really clamp down. So you can dodge a lot of bullets too with DNS filtering. This is another great security tool with DNS. I'm sure most of you have heard of Pi-hole. Yeah. Running that at home, it's a lifesaver. Yeah. Usually you're thinking of it of, oh, I'm blocking all those obnoxious ads that pop up all over the place. But ad networks are threat vectors, aren't they? Like Google just recently had a problem where they were distributing malware in their ad network again as they're trying to get you to watch their ads on YouTube. A little bit of a mixed message there, isn't it? So it's great for ad filtering, but it's also great for blocking security threats. You can block things such as known phishing domains. A favorite of mine is to block newly created domains, anything less than 30 days old, because 9 times out of 10, they're used for something malicious. Although one of my favorites is catching people who are going out and registering domains in your company without using the official registrar. And then they create a ticket and say, hey, why is my newly registered domain not working? You're like, oh, okay, you went over to GoDaddy and you're supposed to be using our, official registrar. Right to jail right away. So you can filter out things like command and control domains, malware distribution. Now, I will say that Pi-hole isn't necessarily intended to be a commercial solution. You can use it that way in a smaller office and it'll work perfectly fine. But there are a lot of commercial options out there. Cisco Umbrella, Infoblox Blocks One Threat Defense, Cloudflare Zero Trust, OpenDNS, tons of services out there. And many of them are hosted services so that pretty much all you need to do is say, here's where I'm going to forward from my internal DNS servers, and you call it a day. There's no infrastructure to set up from there. Your internal DNS servers can do filtering too. Unbound can take a block list. I believe Bind can also take block lists. So if you want to roll your own, you absolutely can do that. But there's a lot of great solutions out there. And this is something where it is super lightweight. Like users don't even notice the impact because there's nothing running on their systems. Great way to be able to use DNS as a security tool. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about DNSSEC. Has anyone here bothered to look into DNSSEC or implement it? You hate it, right? It's terrible. It's awful. The ideas were great, but kind of like IPv6, it came down to implementation time, and everyone was like, well, this sucks, because it was designed to use spherical chickens in a vacuum. So the idea behind DNSSEC is adding cryptographic signatures to your DNS records so that you know that the zone is signed and all DNS records are correct. It's got full integrity. That sounds pretty cool, right? Like you're saying, yeah, I've signed it. All my records are cool. There's no DNS spoofing. There's no man in the middle. I'm secure. Except the setup is really terrible. And you're going to hate terms that come out of my mouth if you've ever heard something like key signing key. That should make your gut twist up. So first, you need a key to sign your zone. And this is fairly straightforward. You grab the set of records from your zone. You sign the entire zone, spit out a signature, you publish the public key so it can be validated. But now you need to also sign the zone signing key. Oh no, we're getting into multiple keys, aren't we, in key management? So we add another key, the key signing key, which signs the zone signing key, and you publish the public card of the key signing key. Don't worry, it only gets worse from here. So your domain like bobsawesomewidgets.com doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? You remember I talked about zones, right? It has a parent domain, com. And now you have to drag the parent into it to do additional signing. And that parent is also signed by a special root signing key that's used in a key signing ceremony. I swear I'm not making this up. For 7 people who each hold a piece of the key assemble to do the needful. I know this sounds absolutely bonkers, but this is actually how it works. If all this signing business wasn't enough to put you off, DNSSEC also has a problem with subdomain enumeration. Now, remember I said you sign the whole zone, right? Now, and if you don't have DNSSEC, does anyone get a full copy of your DNS records? No, not unless you said they can do a zone transfer. But you have to sign the entire zone in DNSSEC and publish the entire zone. And so all of a sudden, all of your DNS records are out there for the world to see. That might be a little bit of a security risk for you if you don't want people to necessarily know that it's there. And I know security through obscurity sucks and blah, 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 but it's still not a bad thing to have. So that might give an attacker a hit list. Now, there's some mitigations for it, but it is a workaround. It requires very careful planning in your implementation. I know there's probably a lot of you out there who, like me, have had experience working with cryptography, and you're starting to think, wait a minute, you've got keys here. Now, how long are keys good for? Not forever is the answer, which means that you have to start rotating those keys. And so that you will end up with having to use key management to rotate these keys out. And now you're talking about an HSM, which nobody wants to have to deal with. So you also can have some problems with DNS amplification attacks, which are way worse with DNSSEC. So the short of DNSSEC is that, yes, you can get all sorts of additional integrity, but there are a lot of dragons here, and it's usually that dragon on the right. Thanks for coming here. I will certainly open up the floor to any questions, comments, or rude noises that you may have.